right, man. It is so good to see everybody. Welcome to our monthly leadership community. Who's excited to be at Leadership Community? Yeah, man. Very good. Very good. So a lot of exciting things happening here tonight. Mike Keaton having his acting debut. How about that, man? And where's he at, man? Where's he at? Where's old Keaton at? Where's Mike Keaton? Where's he at? Okay. Autographs afterwards, right, man? So, man, how about that? That was pretty cool, man. Scott's old at this. He's old school at this, man. So anyway, we have a good time when we get together. And you guys know I say this every single time we do this, that I really believe this is the single most important thing we do every month. It really is. And so the fact that you're here means more than you know. And I will tell you, honestly, I mean, what pastor would not want the opportunity to meet with all of the leaders in his church? Not all of them are here, but a lot of them are. And to have the opportunity to just talk to you about where we are, what we're doing, where we're going. And so what an important thing it is. And I just want to say thank you for carving it out in your schedule, because I know there's a million other things that are competing with this, and you made it a priority to be here, and so we want to respect your time, make the most of the time we have together, and I'm really excited. We're going to do things a little bit different tonight, and I'm really excited about what I believe God can do here before it's all said and done. So thank you for being here. You know, I do this every single time we do it. I always want to recognize anybody that's here for their very first leadership community. So if this is your very first time, would you just stand real quick? We won't make you say anything or sing anything, but would you just stand just for a minute? Anybody new at all tonight? Anybody new? Anybody new? There you go. There we go. Yeah. So we do have another newbie here, and this is the youngest member of our leadership community. Blade and Hannah Schaefer have brought their little baby boy here tonight, and stand up, hold him up like Lion King kind of thing, you know. Boom, 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 boom. Yeah, man. And so if you haven't met him yet, his name is Titus Pastor Ken Adams. Anyway, I begged them to name him after me, but they wouldn't do it. So anyway, I do want to just tell you, man, do not miss this refuel on the road. Now, some of you are fairly new and you don't remember this, but this is not the first time that we've taken our leadership community on the road. We actually did it years ago, and the very first one was at Lake Lanier Islands, and the thing I remember most is John Van Horn leading the Congo line around. You remember that, don't you, man? And if that happens again, it may be the last one we have. But anyway, it was. I mean, that's how much fun we have. We just have a whole lot of fun, and so I promise you don't want to miss. We're going to Lake Blackshear, which is down in Cordele, and we are renting out the whole place. So we're going to have the ballroom. We're going to have we're going to have the whole place, just Crossroads Church. So you're going to want to come be a part of it. It's going to start on a Thursday night, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. We'll finish by noon so we can get back, because we got a Saturday night service. So I don't know who thought of that, but that's a great idea. Great idea, Pastor Ken. So anyway, and then also, I just want to say one other thing. Just it's a thank you, but also it's a request that we have a great problem right now in our church, and the problem is that God's bringing a lot of new people to our church. In fact, John Alexander was just telling me that his wife Cindy works in our children's ministry, and we had 18 first-time families at 11 o'clock. Is that what you said, John? How many? 13, yeah. That's still a lot of first-time families right there. And those are the only ones that told us that they were here, right? And so there's a lot of people who didn't. And so now just so you understand that's it. They came to 11 o'clock because typically that's when first-time families will come. And so what we really need right now is that we really need our church, and especially our leadership community, to really have what I believe is a missionary heart, and that is to say, I'm going to make room by coming to a Saturday night, coming to Thomas Crossroads, coming to 9 o'clock or something, so that I can make room for all those families that tend to show up at that 11 o'clock hour. So it really is important. I'm going to just say this. I'm not asking you to do that so that more people will come. I'm asking you to do that because more people are coming. That's why I'm asking you to do that. So this is not one of those things we're saying, well, if we do this, they'll come. No, they're coming, so we need to do this, right? And so listen, if it doesn't work for your family, no problem. Somebody else will be able to make that move. And if enough people make that move, then that will create lots of room for the people that God's bringing. So that's really good. So you have an outline that's right there on your table. If you grab it, I want to walk through some stuff with you tonight that we call basically building our core, building our disciple-making core. I don't know if you've been able to pick up on this or not, but I actually, several months ago, I sort of started a series in leadership community, and we don't typically think of it that way. We don't do it that way a lot. But what I've been doing is I've been systematically, every time we do one of these large groups, I've just been taking you back to our strategy, and I've just been walking you through our church strategy of how we help untrained seekers become fully trained disciples. And so if you have kind of picked up on this, the first thing we did is that we talked about how do we help people step out of the culture into our crowd. And then we talked about how do we help people in our crowd step into community. And so today we're going to talk, we'll come back to it in a minute. We're going to talk about how do we get people in the community to become part of what we call a disciple-making core. And so for those of you in this room, this should all be very, very familiar. In fact, most of you should have already filled in your blanks before I ever started talking. But there's a chance you didn't. And so that is what I'm here to do, is to fill in your blanks. So let's take a look at how do we build a disciple-making core. Now, it's interesting because a lot of times I get opportunities to go and share and talk to other groups and pastors and stuff about how do you have a disciple-making church. And a lot of times I'll have people ask me, or I'll have an opportunity to share with people sort of my story into disciple-making. And it's funny because a lot of times people will say, because I talk about it so much, a lot of times people say, well, I don't think I ever have heard how you got started in it, even here in our own church. And so just to give you an idea, so I grew up in a great church, but I grew up in a church where I was never discipled in a Jesus style of disciple making. Nobody ever took me and invited me into a small group, poured into me, helped me to grow, taught me how to live like Jesus lived. Nobody ever did that. And so I had never been discipled in that fashion, the way we do it here, nor had I ever discipled anybody. And so I knew a lot about Christ. I was a follower. I was committed. I was serving him, but I just never had that opportunity to be in a discipleship group like that. And as a result of that, I grew up in a church that did not make fully trained disciples. They made partially trained disciples. Anybody know what I'm talking about? So you say, what do you mean partially trained? So they got saved and they got baptized, but guess what? That's as far as they went, right? So we didn't teach them how to turn around and do the same thing with somebody else. And so that's kind of the environment that I grew up in. A lot of you guys probably been in that same kind of environment. So when I was I think I was probably a junior in college, or maybe my last year of college, something like that. And I was dating Val. She was my girlfriend then. She's my wife now. And so we were dating, and she said she was working as a part-time summer youth director in a church in Loganville. And so they were going to do a beach retreat down to Panama City, and they were going to take a bunch of young people from their church. And so they said, who are going to get to speak? And Val said, well, we should ask my boyfriend, because he speaks sometimes at like FCA and stuff like that. I wasn't planning on being a preacher by any means. I wasn't planning on doing any of this. And but I just led a few Bible studies and stuff like that. So she thought, well, I'll just ask him if he'll do this. And so she said, well, what do you think about doing this? And I said, well, let me pray about it. And then I said, but does this mean I get to spend a week at the beach with you? And she said, yes. And I said, well, then God said yes. And so we went down there to Panama City. It was a very spiritual thing for me. And so we got there, and I started teaching these Bible studies every night. This is crazy. This is really true. So I started preaching basically on the great commandment. And I preached on how to have a right relationship with God, how to have a right relationship with you, and how to have a right relationship with others. And so I had no idea what I would eventually be doing, but I started doing this. And what's crazy is that God showed up. And amazing what happens when you just preach his word, right? And you open it up. And so God showed up, and we had a revival at Panama City Beach in this little place. And a bunch of kids got saved, and one kid had brought marijuana, and he went out in the ocean, threw it. I mean, it was like it's a huge thing, man. He's throwing his pot out in the ocean and all this kind of stuff, and other kids went swimming after that. I don't know why they were doing that, but anyway, so it was just amazing. So while I was there, so there was 5 guys in this group that I really connected with. And this is what I was afraid of, is that if I didn't do something to help these guys grow, they were going to end up being partially trained disciples. Because I knew the kind of church they'd come from. Not a bad church, just a very traditional program type church. And I knew that nobody would, because Val was not going to do that. She was a part-time summer youth director. She was going back to West Georgia, and somebody needed to go and pour into these guys. So I invited these 5 guys, said, what if you guys would come over to my house, where I was still living in my parents' basement? And I said, what if you guys would come over to my house every Thursday night, and let's just meet together, and let me just, I didn't even know what to call it. I said, let's just have a Bible study. And I realized that what I was doing is I was discipling them. And we would sit in my basement in my parents' house, and basically every week I would say, okay, let's just talk about how our week went. Let's talk about, what were our victories, what were our struggles, that kind of thing. And then I would say, let's open up the Bible. And we just went to like the book of Colossians and Philippians and places like that. And I said, let's just start studying. Let's just read through it and talk about it. And then I would say, tell me where you want to be held accountable, and how's God working in your life, and what can we pray about? And little did I know that what I was actually doing was what nobody had ever done with me, and I was discipling these guys in a similar fashion to the way Jesus did it. So as a result of that, if you fast forward the tape about another 15, 20 years later, so out of those 5 guys that I met with, 2 of them became full-time pastors, and one of them became at least for a while, he was an administrator in a church in Loganville, and another one became a missionary, I believe. Only one. One of them became an elder in a church that Mike Keaton started as a plant from Crossroads Church. How about that? And then the only one isn't really walking with the Lord these days, and as far as I know, he's still not involved in church. So out of that experience, basically, I said, I'm going to do this the rest of my life. Because I've been in church my whole life, and I've never seen anything change people's lives like what's just happened here. I guess I met with them for about a year. I don't even really know how long I met with them. But I just remember going, this works. And funny, right? That something that Jesus did would work today. I mean, that's amazing, right? And so I said, this works, and I'm just going to do this for the rest of my life. So honestly, as most of you know, I'm doing it today. I'm doing it every week of my life, and I've been doing that for the last 32 years. And so I share that because when God called me here to be the pastor of our church, I just felt like that we should be doing ministry. And I didn't get to this right away. God kind of had to take me through a process, but I realized we just needed to be doing church based on the same way that Jesus did ministry. That's a novel idea, isn't it? In fact, isn't that crazy that we would do it any other way? Let's let that think in for a minute. That I realize that we should be doing church the way that Jesus did ministry, and that there is actually churches that don't do that is mind-boggling to me. And the fact that we are even tempted sometimes to not do that and to get out of our lane and to start doing other things, because you know that the good is always the enemy of the best, isn't it? And so we're tempted by doing that. But what I discovered is that Jesus had a very intentional and a very strategic process for how he led people to go from what we would call an untrained seeker to becoming a fully trained disciple. That's what he called them in Luke chapter 6, verse 40. And so there's an outline that you have here on your it's on your outline, or actually on the back of your outline, that shows you the strategy that we're using here in our church. And we have been using this since we started, but honestly, we haven't always done it as probably as effectively as I feel like we are doing now, and we're trying to get even more and more effective at it. And so basically, here's what we're doing, is that we're trying to help people we're not trying to reach people from other churches, by the way. You knew that, right? I mean, sometimes that happens, but that's not what we're trying to do. What we're trying to do is that we're trying to reach people that are far from God. And we want to try to help people in our culture, come to know Christ and eventually step into our what we call our Christ crowd, or our weekend service. And if they haven't come to know Christ before that, we certainly hope they do there, right? And that's why we do a response, and that's why we give people an invitation. And by the way, 2 people got saved in the Connection Center this weekend. Isn't that great, man? So 2 girls got saved, yeah. And so you may not always see that, but yes, it does happen. And so we're trying to move people from the culture to the crowd, but we don't want people just to stay in the crowd, because a crowd is not necessarily a church, is it? You could have a crowd of people that come to get good worship and get teaching and leave and it not make any impact in the world. But a church is here to make an impact in the world. And so we want to move people from the culture to the crowd to community, and then we want to move them into the core. And here's why we want to move them into the core. Because we don't want just to have an audience, we want to have an army. You everybody get that? Nobody wrote that down. So you all write that down. Here we go. So we don't want, there's no blank for that. You just got to write it on the top. So we want to move people. We don't want to just have an audience. We want to have an army. An army is what? People who are trained, people who are equipped, people who are engaged in battle. An audience is spectators. An audience is people who come to watch a show. We are not trying to create a show. We are trying to win a war. And that is a spiritual battle that's going on. And that's what we do here. And so we are doing the exact same approach that Jesus did. So step 1, from the culture to the crowd, Jesus said to the disciples, come and see. That's right. Y'all should know this. And then in the crowd, John the Baptist said, behold the Lamb of God. And he was lifted up. And that's what we do in the crowd. But then once they come to the crowd, then Jesus said, come and follow me. So now enter into relationship with me. And then the third step, he said, come and, y'all should know this. Come and what? Remain in me. Very good. Y'all do know this. Come and remain in me. That's what we're going to talk about today. And then next time we do this, we'll get to number 4, and that is come and go out from me. And that's where you are. That's why you're here, because you're at this called level. You're at this 4th step in this process. So I hope you see right now that clearly when you get to this level of developing a core, you are not a seeker anymore. You are not a follower anymore. You are now a disciple. You are now a student. And the difference between a follower and a disciple is obedience. It's obedience. Followers are not necessarily committed to a lifestyle of obedience. They're still just sort of checking it out. They're following it. They're learning. But there's a different level when you go from a follower to a disciple. Jesus said in John chapter 8, verse 31. Now remember that he has been with these disciples for a while at this point. And Jesus said to the Jews who believed in him. Now remember that. He's speaking to those who have what? So they're not outsiders. They're actually what? They're actually inside. They're followers. And he says, if you abide in my word, you are truly my disciples. So that abiding in his word, or some translations say to remain in his word. So that is an act of obedience. And this is where we get the word disciple in the New Testament, which is actually the word mathete. It's a Greek word, mathete. It's used 269 times in the Gospels and Acts, 269 times. It means when you become a mathete, when you become a disciple, It means that you are committed to learning from your rabbi. That's what that means. And so Jesus was not the only rabbi who had disciples. He was just the only rabbi that was really the Son of God. It was worth following. And so what happens here is that a mathete is somebody who is trained or somebody who is equipped or somebody who has been taught. And so what Jesus did is that Jesus was not winging it. He was not making it up. Jesus was not flying by the seat of his robe, okay? Jesus was strategic and intentional of finding people far from God, saying, come and step into being a follower, into community with me, and then step into a core. But what's interesting is that these are not two separate groups for Jesus. These are the same groups. They're just going to a different level. Everybody with me so far? They're not a different group. They're just going to a different level. So, in this context, we want to ask this question: what are the principles? What are the principles that we see in the way Jesus built his core that we need to apply today in how we build a disciple-making core? And so I want to give you about 4 principles. Let's just try to jump in here real quick because I want to save time for something really important at the end. So number 1 is that Jesus found the core in the community. Now you realize that at this point in the game is that there were not 12 disciples at this point. There was a lot of followers, and there were some that he had called, but he had not designated them. Jesus did not designate the disciples, the 12 disciples, as apostles until about a year and a half into his ministry. So he doesn't do this on day one. He has 2 or 3 different times where he calls them to follow him, but they don't really become designated as disciples and apostles until fairly well into his ministry at this point. And the reason this is so important is this: the reason that Jesus developed his disciples out of community and not straight out of the crowd is because the best discipleship always comes out of relationships. This is huge. If you're going to say, where is the best way to do discipleship? The very best way to do discipleship is people that you already have fellowship with, people that you already have a relationship with. And so really and truly what we do here is that we want to move people out of the crowd into community and find people into community before they're actually stepping into the core. Why is that? It's important for this reason. Because as they spend time in community, what do you discover about them? Whether or not they're faithful, right? Whether or not they are available, whether or not they are teachable. You see, when you find somebody that's faithful, available, and teachable, guess what you found? A fat person, right? And so don't be laughing. I mean, it's just, And so you found somebody that's faithful, available, and teachable. And so here's what you need to understand is that community, don't misunderstand this, community actually becomes the testing ground for who is ready to move into discipleship. So here's what we do sometimes. Sometimes we invite somebody into discipleship before they have proven that they've been committed to that first step. And we're asking them to take a huge step before they've even taken a baby step. So if you ask somebody to come to a discipleship and then you get up and they haven't been a part of a relationship and in fellowship, and then they don't show up half the time, and then you get mad at them and you tell them they got to drop out of the group because they didn't show up, that's not right. You shouldn't have asked them to be a part of it at that point. You've actually set them up for failure because you've been premature in inviting them into that level, because this is a deeper level of obedience. You're going to ask them to do homework. You're going to ask them to memorize scripture. You're going to ask them to do a lesson. You're going to ask them, they've got to have a desire to want what you're asking them to be in, or it's been premature. Kind of like this. If you have a daughter and your daughter is single and she goes out on a date one night, and the next morning you are sitting there and you say, well, hey, honey, how did it go? And she said, it was great. We had a great time. Well, tell me about your night. And she says, well, we went to dinner, and then we had a nice dinner, and then we went to a movie, and then we went for coffee, and then we got married. Well, what's going to be well, you already told me what your thought is. No, you ain't doing that, right? So, I mean, honestly, that's a little bit much in a hurry, right? And you say, well, shouldn't you get to know this guy first, right? And shouldn't you take some? So the reason that we invite people out of community to go into the core, because it gives us a chance to get to know them a little bit first. Number two, the second thing, is that Jesus expected the core to count the cost. Jesus expected the core to count the cost. You know, discipleship does have a cost. It is more than simply following. In fact, if you just come and see, how much cost is involved in that? Not much. A little bit. You got to go, right? But not much. We're not asking you to become a part of anything. But if you go from come and see to come and follow me, is there a little bit more cost in that? Yeah, you're making a commitment to be there. But it's not nearly as much as become like me, obey me, remain in me, abide in me. So now we're asking people to go. So even Jesus himself says in Luke chapter 14, verse 27 through 33, he says, whoever does not bear his own cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. Jesus tells us there's a cost right off the bat. For which of you desiring to build a tower does not first sit down and count the cost, whether he has enough to complete it? Otherwise, when he has laid a foundation and is not able to finish, all who see it begin to mock him, saying, this man began to build and was not able to finish. Or what king going out to encounter another king in war will not sit down first and deliberate whether he is able with 10,000 to meet him who comes against him with 20,000? And if not, while the other is yet a great way off, he sends a delegation and asks for terms of peace. So therefore, any of you who does not renounce all that he has cannot be my disciple. So Jesus says, before you build something, you consider the cost. Before you go to war, you consider the cost. Before you become a disciple, you consider the cost. And so obedience requires a deeper level of commitment than just following does. You know, when you start a discipleship group, it is important to let people know the expectation up front and give them an opportunity to say yes to it or no to it. And so it's important whenever we invite somebody to come to an impact kickoff, or whenever we have our next steps classes and that kind of thing, when we start talking about discipleship, we want everybody to know up front that this is not just a fellowship group. This is not a casserole group. This is not a therapy. We're training for war here. I mean, really, that's what we're doing. We're training for war. And so when you invite somebody to come into a impact group, let them know the expectation up front. Because here's what I can tell you. Not everybody is going to be willing to count the cost. John chapter 6, verse 66. Y'all know this verse, right? And after many of his disciples turned back and no longer what? You say, well, I don't understand why people don't stick with it. They didn't stick with Jesus either. You know, they're people who are not going to consider the cost, and they're not going to count the cost, and they're not going to stick with it. You know, think about this. This is a reason why in our military, one of the first things you go through when you join one of our armed forces is you go through some type of what? Boot camp, right? Basic training. And so what does that do? That weeds out everybody, doesn't it? That just weeds out a whole bunch of people. And so aren't you glad that the people that you have fighting for you are people who have passed the test and people who are really committed to what it is that they're fighting for? And so what happens is is that because those people have really been committed, they pass that test, that means that in the long run, we have a much stronger armed forces because of the early cost that was paid and commitment that was made when they joined the military to begin with, isn't it? That's important. Think about that. You know, you want to make sure that the people that you have defending your country believe and want to be out there defending you. You know, that's why it's important to have an expectation up front when you start discipleship. Now, honestly, a lot of people have, there's all different levels of expectation for people. Some people say, well, you know, everybody's got to be at every meeting and everybody's got to do every memory verse and everybody, you know, that might be a little high. That might be a little too. I'm not, if you have people that'll do that, do it, right? But a lot of times you just need to say, hey, I want people to be committed to being here and showing up and being a part of it. And because if they do that, you know you got something to work with. And you know that they are committed. You basically, the biggest problem you have is the people who won't even show up when they are committed to being a part of something. It's hard to teach somebody if they don't show up, isn't it? So the third thing I want you to see is that Jesus' goal for the core was to be fully trained. So when Jesus, this is so important. I want you to get this. When Jesus called those disciples, Jesus had an end in mind. Jesus had an end result. He was not discipling those guys just for the sake of getting together. It was not just the group. This is huge. The group did not exist for the group itself. The disciples were being made to accomplish a mission. And that Jesus never let them forget that. That the group, what happens you see this happen in a lot of churches, especially in Sunday school classes, but you see it even in some you see it in small groups, that sometimes is that you know that a small group has lost the mission when the small group becomes when it becomes the mission in itself. And it becomes more important that we stay together than it is that you help untrained people become fully trained disciples. Everybody okay? All right. I know y'all are. That's why y'all are here, right? And so it's all those other 1,000 people we're worried about, right? And so here's what happens. Is that they were not just meeting for the sake of meeting. Is that they had a job to do. They had a task to complete. And what Jesus was training them to do was to become more like him. Because he knew if there were more people like him all around in all nations, it would eventually change the world. And so this is why that Jesus took this group of men and he taught them not just what they wanted to know, but he taught them what they needed to know. I think probably one of the biggest mistakes in my whole disciple-making life, or I should say it like this, I think one of the biggest learnings I ever had was when I came to realize that for years I used to think, when I first started hearing about discipleship, I thought discipleship was all about this getting deeper thing. I thought discipleship, when I first got turned on to it, I thought it was all about spiritual disciplines, like really, really master spiritual disciplines in my life and get really, really deep. I didn't realize that was never what Jesus intended to do with his disciples. He wasn't trying to get them to master spiritual disciplines. He was training them to do ministry. Boom. That's a game changer. That's a game changer some people never get. Because if all you do is if you just see the purpose of discipleship is us just helping people master spiritual disciplines, then you'll convince yourself You know what? You'll stay at it as long as you can, and at some point you got to say, we got enough to know what we need to do, and we have enough to know how to teach others what they need to do. Now it's time to go. Now it's time to go. Now it's time to go and reach other people and to make more disciples. And so, as some pastor, I think it was Rick Warren said, that as a general rule, most of the church today is that we have been educated way above our level of obedience. So our problem today is not really knowledge. In fact, you know what I have on my, I didn't know that guy called me. Anyway, so on my phone right here, you know what I have? I have as many resources on my phone as some pastors had in their whole library 20 years ago. I'm serious. Hundreds of Bible translations, podcasts, leaders. Information is not our problem today. Application is one of our problems today. And so Jesus didn't give them, just more and more and more stuff. So I started driving when I was 16, all right? When I turned 16, my daddy came and got me out of school, and he took me to the driver's place in State Patrol's office in Lawrenceville, Georgia, and I got my license. So when I got behind that wheel of a car, was I fully developed driver? No, I was fully trained. I wasn't fully developed because I had about 5 wrecks in the first 2 years. I shouldn't have been behind the wheel. But here's the deal, is that you will never be fully developed on this side of heaven, but you can be fully trained. And that's what Jesus did. That's the reason he didn't tell. Jesus did not answer every theological question that they were going to have. And so people who say to you, oh, no, I just got to get deeper. I got to get deeper. I got to get deeper. They're just wanting to get more and more and more knowledge. I'm the first one to tell you I need more knowledge. But if I wait till I get enough knowledge to start making disciples, I will never make a disciple. Are y'all with me? That brings us to the last point of this part, and that is this. Is that, can I just say this? Let me say this. But when we put people in ministry before they're fully trained, guess what we do? We do them a disservice. In fact, in the early years of our church, I learned this the hard way because I saw people that we were moving into impact group leadership that didn't even know, we were reaching a lot of new Christians and people who hadn't grown very much, and we were moving, and we had not given them the foundation that they should have had, and then they don't know very simple things like, is Jesus really God, and lots of basic doctrinal things like that. And so we do not want to be a church where we are launching people into ministry that haven't been trained to do ministry. That's why this is so important, because when you start putting people into ministry without being trained, guess what happens to them? They burn out, they cop out, they drop out, they get hurt and they get burned, and then it's not their fault, it's our fault. We turn them loose too soon. We put them in ministry. So that's why the kind of church that I grew up in is that we didn't make fully trained disciples. We had a nominating committee. And here's how they knew if you were ready to disciple. They would check your pulse like this. You can serve. You can teach Sunday school. You can be a deacon. Don't even get me started. Then number 4, Jesus built a core in order to be something and to do something. So here's how Jesus did it. In Mark chapter 3, verse 14. And he appointed 12, whom he also named apostles, so that they might be, 2 words here, what? With him. In order that he might what? Send them. That's it. That's the whole strategy of Jesus. Because when you're with somebody long enough, what happens to you? You become like them. You start to become like they are, and you start to do what you see them do. And that's the way Jesus made disciples. And so he did that life on life, and he taught them how to be what he wanted. Discipleship is actually like apprenticeship is what it is. And we're just apprenticing people to do ministry the same way that Jesus did. When I built my house years ago, I called this guy. I wanted to put some brick columns up in the front of our house, and I called this guy. And they said, this is one of the best brick masons around. I called him. He came out. He had a helper with him, and then he had an apprentice with him. And they looked at the job, and he said, yeah, we can do it, and for this amount of money. And I said, okay, when can you start? And he said, we'll start tomorrow. And then he didn't show back up. His apprentice did, and his helper did, until they finished the job. And then he showed up to get his money. And I said, well, where have you been all this time? And he said, well, I didn't have to be here. He said, because I've spent the last 2 or 3 years training my nephew, who's my apprentice, how to do what I do so that he can do it when I'm not here. Did you get that? So Jesus is not here, but guess who is? We are. So our job is to teach people how to be like Jesus and how to do like Jesus, because we are being like Jesus. Hello? And doing like Jesus, right? Or at least we're making progress. Can we say that? All right. So we're trying to make progress. You know, I have this quote. I probably shared it with you before, but it's just powerful for me. It comes out of a book by Robert Coleman called The Master Plan of Evangelism. So if you never read this book, you got to read this book, because it's the classic book on disciple making. And isn't it interesting that the title of it is not The Master Plan of Disciple Making? It's called The Master Plan of what? Evangelism, but it's a book about disciple making, because if you make disciples that make disciples, guess what you'll do? You'll reach the world. That's evangelism. This is what he says. He says, in an interview in Christianity Today, Billy Graham was asked an interesting question. If you were the pastor of a large church in a principal city, like Noonan, it didn't say Noonan, I said that. What would be your plan of action? Mr. Graham replied, I think one of the first things I would do would be to get a small group of 8 or 10 or 12 men around me that would meet a few hours a week and pay the price. What did we just say? You count the cost, you set the expectation. Billy's tracking with us, man. Here he is. He says, I would share with them everything I have over a period of years. Then I would actually have 12 ministers among the laymen who could in turn take 8 or 10 or 12 more and teach them. And then listen to this. I know of, this man's been in more churches than anybody in our lifetime. And he says, I know of 1 or 2 churches that are doing that. And it is revolutionizing the church. Christ, I think, set the pattern. He spent most of his time with 12 men. He didn't spend it with a great crowd. In fact, every time he had a great crowd, it seems to me there weren't too many results. The great results, it seems to me, came in his personal interview and in the time he spent with his 12. Man, let me just tell you, if you want to change the world, find a group of people, pour your life into them, and challenge them to go out and do the same thing. And do it every year till you die. And just keep doing it over and over again. And you say, but what if I'm not in a church that does that? Well, you are in a church that does that. But a lot of people aren't, and guess what? You got to do it anyway. It doesn't matter whether you're in a church or not, because the Big C church, that's what we're all supposed to be doing. That's what we're all supposed to be doing. Think about the potential. Think about the potential. If every one of us in this room has 3 or 4 or 5 people that we're pouring our lives into, oh my gosh, isn't that, I mean, it's mind-boggling. And if they turn around, they do the same thing, ultimately we're raising up an army that's going to go after Coweta County for Christ. So how do we do this here at our church? Real simple. 4 things. Number 1, we challenge people to step into the core at our next steps and our impact launches. So what does that mean? So what we try to do is that we give people an opportunity once they have come to our next steps class. There are some people that move from next steps right into an impact group. Not very many, but some do. Most go to a community group first. And then we have impact launches about twice a year when people join an impact group at one of those launches. You say, well, is that the only 2 ways we do it? So those are the 2 ways we do it, but there's a third way that's even better, and that is this, is if they go to a community group and then the community group leader finds a little bit of time in their life to take them through impact, then what you've done, you just raised up a leader right from within your impact group. You're doing it the exact same way that Jesus did it 2,000 years ago. And then you just keep multiplying that way. That's a perfect way to do it. And so, but here's what you don't want. This will kill us. This will kill us. If our small group leaders, community group leaders, let me put it that way, if our community group leaders are discouraging our committed people in community group to get into an impact group, you are holding back the strategy of God to work in our church. Everybody with me? Y'all looking at me like you're mad at me. Listen to me. If you believe in the strategy and you are a community group leader and you're not talking about impact groups, you're not helping drive the mission of the church. And you say, well, they can't do both. They're going to leave my group. Best thing you could do as a leader. Best thing you could do as a leader. You've done your job as a leader. In fact, if you've said, don't go join an impact group if you're going to have to leave our group, then you've not done a good job as a leader. You really haven't. So your job is to help mobilize those people. We do these church-wide things, but where it happens better than anything, because remember what we said when we started, the best discipleship comes out of relationship. The very best way that it happens. We can get so many more people in discipleship if you as a small group leader or ministry team leader sits down and says, hey, have you ever thought about it? It doesn't mean that you got to disciple them necessarily, but I can get you connected to somebody who can help you get into a discipleship group. That happens to me every week of my life. I can't take on any more impact groups right now, but I can get people into impact groups that are starting. Second thing is that we use closed groups of men and women to make disciples. So here's the difference. So our community groups, they're open to, that we have community groups that are men's groups, we have community groups that are women's groups, we have community groups that are couples groups. But when it comes to discipleship groups, impact groups, we're just keeping them separate. Why? Because the level of accountability changes when you go from a closed group to a mixed group. The level of accountability, it's got nothing to do between the differences of men and women. It's just because you're not going to share certain things around other women, or not going to share certain things with men. Men will probably say anything anywhere. That's another whole issue, but that's for a men's conference. But anyway, but the accountability level is different, and so we have a distinction there when we get to a discipleship group. And then the next thing is that we give people a foundation, we give them Christ's character and conduct, and we give them leadership basics through Impact 1, 2, 3, and 4. And so if you're not familiar with that, there's a reason why we're using that. Now, you say, well, how come we can't use something else? Well, in the community group level, you can. In the community group level, you can use something from Charles Stanley, Charles Swindoll, Max Lucado, Joseph Smith. No, you can't use Joseph Smith. I'm just keeping you awake. In fact, if you're wondering about what kind of curriculum you can use or not, it has to be doctrinally aligned and philosophically aligned with our church. And if it's not, we're going to tell you that's wrong. You can't use it. You say, you can't do that. Listen, we will. Because not everything goes. The truth is what matters here. And so there's a lot of people out there that are teaching things that are not in line with what we believe. And so you got to make sure that whatever you teach is sound doctrine and it's in agreement with our. That's why nobody really leads a group until they've first gone through our membership class. You can't be a group leader if you haven't gone through our membership class, because you haven't heard what we believe if you haven't gone through our membership class and agreed to it. So every single group, the reason we have community groups with lots of variety of materials, and in impact group, we're only using one type of material because we know exactly what you're getting when you go through that. You're getting a foundation of things that we believe. You are going to get the character of Christ. You are going to get the conduct of Christ. You are going to get leadership training that gets us all on the same page. So we can have a lot of variety at the community group level, but we got to have focus and a single mindset in the impact level, at the discipleship level. And the reason that's important is because whatever we use is what's going to be reproduced. And if you got a bunch of people that are doing a whole bunch of different things, guess what? Then you're not reproducing anything. You're just spreading out more and more information, all different types of things. And so it's very important that we are laser focused when we get to that. You do realize that in every single university in the country, if your very first English class is going to be what? English 101. Now, what's crazy is that that's the same expectation for a higher learning institution like Georgia Tech as well as it is for University of Georgia. I mean, it's true. It's true. It's true. And so everybody starts with 101 and 201. Everybody goes through the exact same thing. So why do they do that? I have no idea. But somebody somewhere in a board of regents classroom or a boardroom somewhere said everybody needs to know how to develop an essay. Everybody needs to know how to formulate thought and write it and be able to present it. And so if you're going to get a college degree, you're going to do that. Why would we not want every single person that has been discipled, becomes a leader in our church, to know what we believe as Christians, to know an overview of the Bible, to know how to grow spiritually, and to know what their life's mission is? And we give you every bit of that in Impact 1. Why wouldn't we want every leader to know the character of Christ if that's the end product? Why wouldn't we want everybody to know the conduct of Christ if that's the end product? Why would we not want everybody to know what a 315 leader is if that's how that's how God defined leadership in the Old Testament? And then finally, is that we want to reproduce and multiply fully trained disciples. So here's what's important about this, is that when we say that we want to reproduce fully trained disciples, this is not objective. This is not subjective, this is objective. That's a very big difference. Because if you go put your child into a school system somewhere, I promise you, if that school system's worth anything at all, if they're worth their salt at all, is that they have an idea of everything that child's supposed to get in their education from K all the way through 12. Is that right, Val? Gene, is that right? Anybody want to verify? You leaving me out here on my own? Okay. Well, when I used to teach school, here's how they did it. Is that they had this core curriculum type thing. So if you were in that school system, the DeKalb County schools, from K all the way to 12, they had already determined what things they wanted you to be able to be proficient in to get there. And so if that's true, if we care that much about a child's secular education, how much more so should we care about a person's spiritual education? How in the world are we sending people out into ministry and mission fields and Sunday school? I mean, you name it. That don't even know what they believe. Don't even know basic spiritual growth principles. I could go on and on. Y'all get the idea. Churches all do the same thing. So, what does this look like? If we are building a disciple-making core, then we will see more and more people who demonstrate the character and the conduct of Christ and are ready and willing to lead other people in discipleship. That should happen. And if that's not happening, then we are not moving people into a disciple-making core. So we get asked this question a lot of times. Sometimes we meet with other groups and other pastors, and they'll say, so how many people do you have in discipleship? And how many disciples have y'all made that have made disciples? And I always say, well, Jennifer, what would be the answer? And Jennifer, believe it or not, Jennifer says, I don't have any idea. And so we said, you know what? We might not ever really be able to know that, but here's what we could do. Is it, what if we just took a stab at it? What if we could just trace it and try to track it down and just to get an idea? And so Jennifer created this really cool impact tree right here, right? And so this is just a little tree for you to fill out as best you possibly can of anybody that you've discipled that you know has discipled somebody else. Is this right, Jennifer? Am I doing this the right way? And so what I want to do is I want to encourage you to fill this out, if you can, as quick as you can, and just leave it at your table here at the end of the night. And so if you'd like to get a copy for your record, we'll get you a copy as well. I'd be happy to do that. We'll get you a copy. But we want to try to get an idea, just as an idea, of what does it really look like here in our church, and how many people have we got who've discipled and made disciples who made disciples. Now, I will have to say that if you get a sheet and you can't fill it out, that might say something to you. Hello? That might say something to you. That this would be a very powerful way for you to use the influence that God has given you as a leader in this room to start making disciples that make disciples that make disciples. So normally, what we do is, I say at this point, we're going to put some questions on the screen and we're going to break off into small groups and we're going to talk. And then y'all talk about football and stuff like that. And so I thought we'd do something different here today. Ron, Mike, come on up here and grab these mics. And this is what I thought we'd do. I thought we'd finish a little differently. And I thought it might be really cool for us to just hear how God is changing people's lives, maybe even change your life through the discipleship process here at our church as an encouragement to all of us of why we need to be doing this. And I've asked a guy in my discipleship group, Dean, go ahead, Ron, back there to Dean, if he would just share. Now, Ron, don't let it out of your hand. Keep it in your hand, all right? And Dean, just stand up and share a little bit about what discipleship meant to you.
Pastor Ken, when I come to this church, talked to me about, joining his group, and I did. And guys, I have a relationship now with my Heavenly Father. I lost my mom last year, and I don't know that I would have really been able to handle it. I have friends that hold me accountable. I have a pastor that holds me accountable, and I hold myself accountable now. So being able to share with my guys, and when I go home and say we're on break for the summer, my wife's like, when's your group starting back up? So I start, somewhat falling backsliding a little bit, but guys, it's real, and I'm going to work till I take my last breath. So thank you, guys.
That's great, man. Yeah. And so Dean and I spent about 1.5 years together, and now Dean and another guy are leading another group of about 6 or 8 guys in discipleship. So that's really how it works, isn't it, Dean? Yeah. So anybody else? Just a quick story, real quick, just your testimony. How have you seen it change your life? How have you seen it change somebody else around you? Right here, Ron.
You gonna let me hold it? You gonna let me hold it?
Oh, no.
Just so you'll know, I'm the Congo leader guy, and he's in trouble. But no, let me tell you, I've been in this church 26 years. And I worked with high school students for 45 years. And in that time, I can't count the number of kids that have helped me that I've been able to help them. But I lead a small group now of senior citizens. And it's like herding cats, but you know, you get out there and you do it. But the Lord is just really, really blessed, because when you get older like we are, you slow down a lot. But you know the Lord doesn't slow down. I've seen an 80-year-old get saved. I've seen a 76-year-old get saved. I've seen an 80-year-old say, I need to get baptized. And that's just in the last year and a half. Is the Lord good? Is he at work? Absolutely. He just needs a few of us out there to help him out.
That's good, John. Anybody else?
All right, I'm Paul Schrepfer, and I went through discipleship with Ken about 4 years ago. Chris and I were in a group with quite a few guys, but Chris and I were the only two that I think led out of that. But I've got probably 3 or 4 groups behind me that I've discipled. And I've had spouses come to me and tell me, what kind of a difference it's made in the men. I've talked to these guys routinely, and I know how it's helped them get through all sorts of challenges in their lives. And for me, it's a continuous recheck and makes me go back and holds me accountable. You never get through growing. It's constant, but it's great. So
thank you, Paul. Yeah. He's going to go to Kevin. Anybody over here got one real quick? Okay, they're right there with Mel.
So probably 21 years ago, when my wife and I came to Crossroads, grew up in church, grew up in just a traditional church like many of you, but was never discipled. Never knew what it meant to be a disciple and how to make a disciple. So when we came to Crossroads 21 years ago, 22 years ago, first discipleship group I went through was with Pastor Ken. And so he taught me through that group how to be a disciple and then how to multiply and make disciples, which I had no idea. So fast forward now 21 years, 22 years. And obviously some of you know that I'm in baseball professionally. So I've been able to take this concept and this understanding and use it in professional baseball for the last 15 years. And to where now every Monday morning we have a group of between 80 and 90 professional baseball coaches, college coaches, and professional scouts that we're discipling and pouring into. And on Easter week, had the privilege of baptizing a scout with the Baltimore Orioles. So just so much is going on, and it all started right here. So that's a blessing.
That's good, man. That's good. Mel.
Thanks. Hey, sure, thanks. Hey, I'm Melanie Weaver.
Man, she just snatched it out of your hand, boy.
Sorry. So, my husband, Jeff Weaver, and I have been Crossroadies a little over 20 years. And this guy in our church that we had both known and served, it's going to make me cry because it's the sweetest story. He invited him to group with these other men, and y'all, it changed our life. It changed our marriage. One of our elders plays golf with him every week, and he said, man, I can see such a difference in your husband. I said, I can too. So thank you, Ryan Foles, for investing in Jeff Weaver every week. And thank you, Ken Adams, for what you've done. And it's a game changer. And thank you for all that you do. And thank you for discipleship. It's a beautiful thing, and he's grown abundantly. And I'm grateful.
Wow, praise God. That's awesome. Yeah, right here, Ron. got to move, Ronnie. Come on, man.
I'm Mona Donahue, and Bob and I have been in this church almost 30 years, and I am really happy to see what you presented tonight, because we've seen the evolution of impact discipleship, and so much of what you said is true. In the old days, I would just grab my friends, my girls, people I had relationships with, and just bring them in, and people wouldn't show up, people wouldn't do their lesson, and I guess about 10 years ago, we stopped doing discipleship. We did other studies. Bob would do men's studies, great studies with people like Dr. Tony Evans or Beth Moore or whatever. We did a lot of miscellaneous Bible studies. But about a year ago, we started talking and praying, and God was just saying we were missing something. And it was this impact discipleship. And we weren't building the kingdom of God in the way that we needed to. So discipleship has put fresh wind in our sails. And I guess when we had the last impact launch, I just got a group of, asked for some names. And, out of that, Sandy's come. And these ladies have showed up every week, done their lesson, and really challenged me and really motivated me to know that God answered that prayer of what was missing. And Bob, too.
Yeah, and let me just add to that they raised their son here, and now he's got a family of his own, and he's here every Thursday morning, and he is growing like a weed, man. God is working that boy's life because he's committed to a group of guys that Dean is leading over here on Thursday mornings, man. And so it is all to the glory of God that we just do what Jesus told us to do 2,000 years ago. That's so good. Sean, go ahead.
My name is Sean McGough, and I came to this church September 2011. Walked in those doors, coming in there, and there's a Yahoo up there. Oh, Ken. He let me in. I had no idea he was a pastor. And I sat down up by the front like I usually do. I like being up close because I can't see. But he came up there and he preached, and I thought, this guy's got some pretty good abilities. So I came back and I started going to the church, and then one February, the very next February, we ended up coming to a February 14th, a Valentine's Day party here, and met some people sitting at a table, and this guy's name was Jeff Peak. He and Ken Lute, they said to me and my wife, we didn't know anybody really at that time. And they said, hey, do you want to get started in a small group? And I thought, I don't know what a small group is, but we'll give it a go. So we had a little small group. We started out with like 4 couples, and Ken was one of them, and Val. They came and taught us something to do with relationships. And that's one of the things that I had is a bad relationship when I first came to this town. Me and my wife are about to divorce. And when I came here, I got into this small group, built a better relationship with Jesus. Me and my wife got closer than ever. And today we're happier than we've ever been. And I have to tell you that Jesus is the reason. And this church has built so many family and friends. I mean, my wife knew nobody in this town. But now I know a lot of people, and I'm so happy in this community, in this church, and what it can do for a person.
That's great, Sean. That's good. Good. Just a couple more if you want to share. We'll wrap it up here. Anybody else? A couple more. Okay.
Oh gosh, then I get to hold it. My name is Kayla Arrington. 11 years ago, I was saved and baptized at the age of 26. I was not living here. We were in South Carolina. I was not raised in a church. After I got baptized, there was no structure. I didn't really honestly know what was next. In 2016, we moved to Noonan, joined Crossroads a year later, and it was one Sunday that you were talking about impact that I just felt my heart was like stirring for something more. And I joined Shantae's impact group. It was the January before COVID. So it was a long 2 years, but we finished impact this past February. And after even just coming to Crossroads, I felt like I was starting to understand what being baptized meant. But going through impact, I understood what my purpose was, to be a disciple. I felt like there was this void, and like finishing impact made me understand like what I'm supposed to be doing. It has made me be a better mom and understand like training my children. And this is only our second leadership meeting. We just started our own small group recently, but I know that God has more for me, and I don't know what that is yet, but I'm excited to figure that out. But I just wanted to say thank you for making it simple to understand what our purpose is.
So, yeah. All right, so I'm going to let you get out of here. But you have one more? Do you have one more, Mike? Sure, go ahead. I mean, that's up to you, but I don't care.
Sorry to keep you. I've been keeping Ken up to date with this, but I don't know, I've been at Crossroads for 3.5 years or so, and after going through an amazing small group and then being put into 315, I had the courage to start speaking with my friend. I moved from Arizona, so, you know, my drinking buddies back in Arizona, this was a totally different Allison that they had never met before. And so when my friend called me with family troubles, I'm like telling my husband, like, I can't answer her like I used to. I got to give her Jesus, and this is not how I'm used to speaking to my friends back in Arizona. But I'm like, well, she's got to know that that's just what she's going to get now when she calls me. So I started doing that. And so that was 3 years ago or so. She came out to visit almost a year ago last year, and I brought her to see Ken. Of course, she was here over the weekend, so I had to take her to church. And we spent the whole afternoon of her complaining about, I don't like your pastor. I don't like the way he is. And I'm thinking, okay, well, you don't live here, so it doesn't really matter. But, like, I do, but whatever. That's not your cup of tea. So we spent, the whole rest of the weekend just having really deep, like, I wasn't afraid. It was just like, I'm just going to, because I told her, I said, this is your flesh and your spirit. Like, totally, if this is what you're going to pick about, then this is not, real stuff. So anyway, we've had those deep conversations, and she really started revealing in this last year that she was really feeling called, and like she had to nail this down to make a decision. And I'm so excited, but she was baptized last weekend at her church. And through those conversations, and just really pressing, I was raised in church, but I guess not by a Christian family. I don't know, weird. But my dad is like lately been super on fire for Jesus, and he is not connected to a church, but I mentioned her baptism to him, and he went and photographed her baptism at their church and came back with raving reviews about how neat it was to be around a lot of people like him. And I'm like, gee, Dad, you didn't think they'd already thought about that. So anyway, it works over the phone, discipleship. It doesn't always have to be face-to-face, but anyway, what you're doing is having a ripple effect beyond just what's happening here.
Yeah, that's
so
awesome.
Thank you for that.
Praise the Lord. Praise God. Yeah, that's good. That's good. All right, so here's what's happening, man, is that you're doing ministry. And Paul's doing ministry, and Sean's doing ministry, and you're doing ministry, Caitlin. And and all around the room here, you guys are doing ministry because you've been trained to do ministry. And you've been trained to make disciples that are following Jesus. And there are 13 brand new families that deserve to have what you have and that need to be in a church that is laser focused on helping those 13 people get from the crowd to the core. So let's just, first of all, the only person here that should get any glory, honor, praise, or anything is Jesus, because it's his model, not my model. I'm just stubborn enough to keep doing it, and we will. And so let's just leave here. We have no more small group time. We have nothing. I'm gonna pray, and let's just leave here with more resolve than ever to become a movement of multiplying disciples and make as much difference as we can with whatever amount of time God allows us to have left. Amen? Let me pray. Father, thank you for this room full of people, and that nobody's here by accident, nobody's here by coincidence. Thank you for all the stories that have been shared from baseball coaches that are being impacted to drinking buddies in Arizona to a wife and a husband here whose marriage has been radically changed, and 2 or 3 of those actually. And God, we just pray that we would not lose our focus, that we would not get sidetracked, that we would not get distracted by other things that keep us from being and doing the main thing that you called us to do 2,000 years ago on a hillside in Galilee. You told your disciples to go, baptize, make disciples of all nations, teaching them to obey everything that you have commanded us. Help us to do it with everything we have, and we'll give you the praise and the glory for it all. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. God bless you guys. Thanks for being here.